part of the EME team. We can post it on the member site if you want, if everybody agrees. That's we just need a.
Yeah, we will record only the presentation parts and not the breakout groups.
Yeah, the breakout groups will not be recorded. Okay. Wonderful. Thanks very much, Pat. Thank you for all of you coming, some familiar faces and a lot of new people. So very happy to see you. This is one of the largest meetings we've had in our monthly meetings for the social inclusion SIG within IAF, which is a very international group. And as ever, it's very difficult to find a time that meets everyone's needs. So for those of you that are coming in early morning, perhaps on the west coast of the US or Canada, or late evening, if there's anyone from Australia, I see there's somebody from Japan, Malaysia. So it's easy for us in the middle here in Europe, Middle East and Africa that we're at a more reasonable time. So thanks particularly to those of you who are making a special effort to be with us today. This conversation really came up of tough talk, difficult conversations. I used to be a member of the International Counseling Association, and I remember going to a conference in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is probably 20 years ago. And I remember there was, as ever at conferences, and this was in the days when we could go in person, lots of breakout sessions, and you usually have 20, 30 people in breakout session. And there was one just on difficult people and situations, and it was standing room only. There were hundreds of people in the room. There's something about difficult people, situations, conversations, which everybody can relate to. So I think the interest in this, we actually had 45 people register for today, 23 so far, and probably some more will come in. So it's the topic that everyone seems to be able to relate to in different ways, professional, personal, and it's something I've been grappling with both in my work and outside, and I'll show you a little bit more in a moment. So it's hopefully there's going to be something for everybody today to relate to your work, relate to your lives outside, whatever you're doing, and it's going to be a very practical session. We're going to have the chance hopefully to do 3 breakout sessions and actually practice some of the skills we're talking about. A little bit more about me. Next slide, please, Pat. Pat is running the slides. So a little bit more about me. As you may be able to tell from my accent, although people get confused, I'm originally from Manchester in England, and the two things that are most dear to me are in that top left-hand photo, which is my daughter Emma, who actually lives in Texas, and Manchester United. And we can have a difficult conversation about that, particularly if anyone is a Manchester City supporter, but let's do that on the side. That's probably the most difficult conversation for me. I lived for many years in America. I'm an American citizen. Most recently was living in Austin, Texas, where the top right photo was taken. And then about 5 years ago, I had the chance to come and work here in Rwanda with the Akila Institute for Women, which is was a women-only college focused on vocational skills. And that brought me to Rwanda. I fell in love with Rwanda, and I came back to live here just over 2 years ago. And from a diversity and inclusion perspective, was involved in the first diversity and inclusion forum here, sponsored by the World Bank and the UN. And diversity and inclusion has a very different meaning here, and I'll go into that a little bit on the next slide. So when we're talking about difficult conversations, as I'm sure many of you know, but if anyone doesn't know, there was a horrific genocide. Well, every genocide is horrific, but for those of you that don't know the details, it happened 27 years ago. It was by the majority Hutu against the ethnic minority Tutsis and Hutu allies. Round about 800,000 to 1 million people were killed in only 3 months. So it was very brutal and has had a legacy, obviously, within Rwanda. And it's a difficult conversation to talk about the genocide here. Everybody that I know was directly or indirectly affected by the genocide, even if they were a baby, even if they were in the mother's womb during the genocide or born afterwards. Everybody has been. Go back, Pat. Sorry, can we go back to that slide?
Sorry. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Everybody has been affected here. And when you talk about difficult conversations, the way that Rwanda approached this, and again, I apologize if you already know this, is they realized there were tens of thousands of people that were perpetrators. And so what they decided to do was, instead of going through the traditional, all through the more modern law courts, based on, colonial influence, they went back to a very traditional way of having difficult conversations through what they called the gacaca courts, which, as you can see bottom right there, perhaps, is where basically the accused has to stand up in front of their peers, whether it's their neighbors, their people in the village, whatever group that they are accused of doing harm to, and actually testify and admit to what they've done, and then seek forgiveness. And then the court decides what kind of punishment discipline is appropriate. And this worked incredibly well. So they had these difficult conversations, which a lot of people compare with the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa. It's a little bit different, but the same idea is of finding a humane way to have that very difficult conversation around genocide, around murder. And again, one of the most difficult conversations you can imagine. And so I find that here, I have to be very careful how I have conversations. And even when I'm meeting someone for the first time, I don't ask them, how's your family? Tell me about your family, because that might immediately bring up memories, very painful memories. So we have a different way of conversing here. And difficult conversations sometimes are just written about, and I've included a link about money and about expectations, that, being part of a collective society, what are people's expectations and responsibilities in terms of helping other people. And I sometimes get 4 or 5 requests for money in a day. And so I really need to have that difficult conversation sometimes around who I can help, when I can help them, how much I can help them. So it's at every level. Here in Rwanda, and obviously these conversations are different in different countries, but it's something that's constantly there around having difficult conversations, whether it's on a professional level, societal level, personal level. So it's something that for me is very personal indeed. And now I'd like to ask for you, we're now up to 23 people. So on the next slide, we're going to go into quick breakouts. And you'll be put into random breakouts. So Pat, if you and I are not in breakouts, that means we can have 7 groups of 3. We'll put you in a breakout for about 8 minutes or so. And when you get into the breakout, please self-appoint a timekeeper. And each person then has 2 minutes to answer these 3 questions. What is your name and current location? If you haven't already shared it in chat, but maybe people haven't seen it. What do you currently do in relation to facilitation? Because we know we have a lot of new people today, so we don't assume that you are a facilitator. Perhaps you do something else in relation to that, perhaps, for example, mediation, training, coaching, whatever it might be in relation to facilitation. And why you're interested in this difficult conversations, particularly across difference. And we're leaving that very open in terms of how you interpret that. So even though this SIG is around social inclusion, we'll leave you to define what you mean by difference. So Pat, are you ready to put people into?
Yes, you are in the room, Jeremy, but you can come out of it, okay?
Yeah, I won't go into a room,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
if you can put, I think we're 22 now.
Yes, yeah. 7 rooms. So
Okay.
3 in a room. Yeah, 3 in a room. 8 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. We'll see you back in 8 minutes. Do you want to?
Oh, are we on recording? We are recording ourselves. We're not recording the recording will follow me.
I know, but people won't want to. Oh, we're putting the recording on again.
Yeah.
The distinction between the two. And this time we still have room for a few more people to contribute. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Still got room for 2 more, 1 more person. And I think we can close it. Pat, I think I can do it from here. Let me just end the
Thank you.
poll and share the results. So you should be able to see now. So no one is an expert in this. 4 of you say that you're good at this. 6, and I think it was 11 before that said you're okay, and now 9, as opposed to I think it was 5, so you have a long way to go. So it is more difficult when you're leading a conversation versus facilitating. And this is what we're going to be focusing on primarily. A lot of what we discuss is appropriate to groups, but this is more the one-on-one, the side conversation, the phone call afterwards, things that can come up. So thanks very much for contributing to this. And what we'll do, if you can go back to the slide deck, Pat.
Okay.
And so in terms of an agenda for the rest of our session today, next one, that's right. So 4 elements of difficult conversations: facing up to a difficult conversation, planning a difficult conversation, leading a difficult conversation, and then acting on it as well. So those are the 4 areas we're going to cover. And again, just in terms of how our process for today, and these are things that I'm sure many of you use in your conversations, whether they're formal within groups or even informal conversations within communities, whatever it might be. So just a few agreements that are particularly appropriate to difficult conversations, particularly across difference. So a few, obviously, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Next slide, please, Pat. Confidentiality, challenge by choice, that people, taking risks, but again, it's their choice about how far to go. Misery is optional. If it's too hot, too cold within the room, but also in terms of how engaged people are, how comfortable they feel or not. Give people, again, the choice in terms of where they are in the process. And some of the most difficult conversations I had as a facilitator was working with the police. This is in Austin, Texas, on racial profiling. And so, there they were not voluntary, they were mandatory. They didn't want to be there. They didn't want to discuss racial profiling, and they were armed. They all had guns. And so misery was optional. We wanted to try and create an environment where people were willing to try out something new. But we realized the stakes were fairly high. And Great Escape in terms of just not being, if you can avoid your phone, text, WhatsApp, whatever, just focus on your connection here in the group. We really appreciate that. Some additional agreements that can be very appropriate, again, for these kind of conversations, whether facilitated or direct. Perceptions reality. I had a workshop participant last year who talked about not just a listening ear, but a helping ear, in terms of how you can help someone, whether it's as a facilitator or more directly. Taking everything with a pinch of salt, that, you obviously listen to everything, but at the same time, not necessarily accept what everyone says, and be able to apply a certain level of discretion, caution, analysis, suspending judgment for ourselves as well as others, giving the benefit of the doubt, and as appropriate, agree to disagree agreeably, particularly when you're talking about difficult conversations. So these are just a few things that, again, I'm sure many of you use already, just as a kind of reminder. So let's talk about facing difficult conversations. And I have a cartoon here from the New Yorker, 2 dogs talking. It's not enough that we succeed, cats must also fail. So I'm glad you're laughing. I have both dogs and cats, so I understand the very difficult conversations they sometimes have. And obviously the cat is the one that rules the roost. How do we face difficult conversations? So on the next slide, what I tried to do, and this was challenging, was to think about, well, what are some of the common obstacles for facilitators to lead difficult conversations? Because I think it is a different approach, whereas facilitators, we have a different perspective. I have a quotation there from Dante Alighieri, which I'm sure many of you have seen, the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. So that's the thing is, again, when we're talking about difficult conversations across difference, sometimes we do have these moral crises within our sessions that we may be facilitating. And how do we deal with them? You know, can we always maintain our neutrality? So, and that photo actually is of me doing a warrior dash many years ago. Actually, not many years ago, maybe 5 years ago. But again, that thing, you know, when we have a baptism by fire, how do we deal with those situations? And these on the right are just some of the obstacles that I found myself as a facilitator and other people have shared with me within this group and outside of, you know, why sometimes it's difficult for us as facilitators to lead those difficult conversations. We may, you know, want to avoid conflict, maybe averse to risk. And what I put there is the facilitator refuge, that, you know, because as facilitators, there is a certain requirement around neutrality, around objectivity. And that, you know, is very valid, yet at the same time, is it sometimes a refuge? Is it, to go back to the quotation, is it sometimes not appropriate for us to remain neutral, and that we do have to be more proactive? So I'm just putting out there as a question. And other things, that if we do get directly involved, we could look foolish, we could look ignorant, particularly if we're dealing with a difference that we're not familiar with. So I'm just sharing for me as a inclusion facilitator, I've been challenged in recent years with issues around trans culture and dealing with that, you know, the T in the LGBTQI, and dealing with my own ignorance about some of the issues and looking at that. And, you know, sometimes again, when we step out of the facilitator mold, we can show our ignorance, which some of us, you know, don't feel comfortable with. We can look insensitive. We could maybe say something which is not appropriate. Even something as simple as perhaps using the wrong pronoun. And, you know, in a stress situation, if we're facilitating on our own particularly, that can happen. And then just simply getting upset. We can be triggered ourselves, or we can upset other people, which then can lead to them criticizing us, attacking us, ostracizing us, and just quite simply losing control. And I have to say, from my 30 years of doing that, I've probably been through all 12 of those in some way at some time. So for those of you who've been doing this for a long time, I'd be interested to see, you know, sort of if you have been dealing with that as well. So it's uncomfortable because in some situations we're being asked to do something that we're not usually doing. And so what I'd like to do is to take this list, and we can share it again in the chat as we did for the previous breakout. And then we have a question for you. In the next breakout, you'll be put into random groups again of 3. We're 23, so it'll be 7 groups of 3. This time, please quickly self-appoint a facilitator to lead the conversation and a note taker to share anything afterwards. And then the conversation is just one question this time. What gets in your way in terms of affecting leading difficult conversations across difference? So again, whether it's within a group, one-on-one, wherever it might be, professionally, personally, and we'll put the 12 obstacles in the chat in a moment. So we're going to put you in small groups again, and we're going to take 10 minutes to do this, give you time. And we're going to share the 12 obstacles. So very interested to see if you came up with any other obstacles in your small group discussions. So please share in the chat, or if you want to come on an audio video and just share, that's fine too. Just let us know however you want to contribute. If you want to put your hand up to speak, or just to put it in the chat. Any other obstacles that you came up with, or anything else related to this that you want to share?
So I could share what
Please do.
yeah. So we had David and Colin and myself in our group, and 4 points came up as to when, what gets in the way of having effective conversations about difficult things. So first, and this was common between David and Colin, that when the other person gets too angry or too violent, that creates a barrier, and it doesn't allow them to have a effective conversation.
Right.
And the second one was when there are fixed opinions held by different, both the people about a particular concept or a principle or a theme, and both are not willing to kind of move from that opinion. The third is when any concept or a term or a principle is interpreted in different ways by by all the stakeholders in the conversation. And finally, when there is a lot of baggage or past experience that we have about each other, when coming to a conversation, that sometimes get in the way of having an effective conversation as well. So
Yep.
these are the 4 points that came up in our group.
Great. No, thank you. No, this very, and obviously can go both ways. These are all things that you could be prey to, but obviously the other people involved as well, as you said. Laurie is sharing, we all notice that in difficult conversations, we have feelings of pressure, hotness, or explosion inside our body. So it's that psychosomatic response, absolutely, that can be an obstacle. I had number 7 getting upset, but that takes it to another level. And Sudeep is sharing group 7, ideology has to be compromised before harmony, making it clear that everyone has differences and has to be accepted however diverse those views are. Point 3, maintaining neutrality despite having very strong and clear bias or prejudice of one's own. Absolutely. So it's that thing again of when is it appropriate to stay neutral, when sometimes you have to step out of that role, and which can be very difficult, in different ways. So maybe that, changing the role, that could be also another obstacle where it could lead to confusion. If people don't know, well, are you being a facilitator now? Or are you talking for yourself, or, whatever it might be. So clearly there's a lot of areas, there's a lot of subtleties, things that aren't immediately obvious to this. So what I'd like to do is to move into the next level. And John's just sharing some of our points, people having fear and anxiety about disturbing an existing relationship again, upsetting others or getting upset. In our group, we had different experiences with conflict and difficult conversations in our past, which stems us today. So again, it's that baggage that Shalaka just shared as well. We're bringing in our own experiences and perhaps, certain reservations, biases, prejudices. So again, it's all part of the process. Moving into, okay, so talked about, facing up to conversations, but also now thinking about how do we plan for conversations. So the first thing is, what can trigger a conversation? And sometimes, it can be, as very often happens, is particularly within a group, is just a comment. So these are some examples I've come across in my work, and just as examples of things that could trigger that conversation, whether it's within the group or one-on-one, as I said, pulling someone aside, talking during coffee break or even after the session or between sessions. So just some of the things that people have said either to me or to other people within a group. Who in the heck are you to tell me what to do? This is all political correctness and cancel culture. It means nothing in the real world. That was in the last year. Particularly in response to the BLM movement, etc. Can't you tell them just joking? You people are way too sensitive. Like, no, that's one that's I've been hearing for decades, for years and years and years. When people make an inappropriate joke or whatever, it's like, it's your fault. You're too sensitive. I've been doing things this way for a long time. I don't see any reason to change now. Again, I've been hearing that for a long time. And this can go either way. I've enough of being singled out, leave me alone. And so that can sometimes be person in a group.
Oh, so the rain did come. Yes. Will you be okay? Yes. Good.
Oh,
Okay, take care. Okay.
you mind muting? Sorry, we have someone on audio. If you don't mind muting, thank you. So just again, the idea of being singled out, whether as singled out as part of a dominant privileged group or the other way around. Sometimes, you know, where people are feeling, you know, I'm being singled out because I'm the only person belonging to this group and I have to be the spokesperson of the group. So it can go either way, but still these are things that I found can lead to difficult conversations. And I'm sure you've got many, many other examples as well. Just looking here to the chat, John sharing power imbalances in groups are always tough. Important to acknowledge at the start, creating effective guidelines and learning contracts, absolutely. John, again, a reminder really that intent and impact are very different things, absolutely.
Pat, I think Jeremy froze.
I was cut out. Maybe other people were too.
Okay. Let's send him a note.
With a positive face. Just froze.
Yeah. Okay, while we wait for him to reboot, let me just...
Oh, he's back. He's back.
Oh, is he back? He's back?
Okay.
That's good.
What was it, just me that was kicked out?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I
You
was kicked out as
froze,
well.
Jeremy.
I was outdoors as well.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So let's move into...
That was a difficult situation for you, Jeremy, just now.
Exactly. I was just like, what? You know, you're ostracizing me. I've said something inappropriate. You know, what's going on here? So once you have a situation, you know, triggered by something like that or whatever it might be, and again, if we had more time and we had a full day, I would ask, you know, everyone to do this, but to think about, okay, let's think about the situation. And, you know, as I'm going through the questions, think about if you've got a real life situation, something you did in the past that maybe didn't go quite as planned, something you're dealing with right now, or maybe something you know you're going to have to deal with in the next few weeks. So think about, you know, just some of the questions you can ask yourself, what's going on, what's really going on, you know, kind of what's underneath the surface, because sometimes, as we well know, what's presents is not necessarily what the real issue is. Why is this happening? Why is it happening now? Very important one again, you know, for us facilitators, what is my role in this? Am I just facilitating? Am I mediating? Am I needing to get involved in this directly? Do I need to lead this? And again, that brings up a point earlier about power differentials and things like that. So there's a lot of subtleties in this, which these questions hopefully can help as you start to think about, okay, what is the situation? It seems like time I do need to have this conversation. So what does that mean? What am I seeing about myself in this situation, in my role? And also, you know, those of you familiar with the Johari window, you know, what is hidden to me? What's my blind spot? What am I not seeing here? And maybe this is where you might talk to someone else and just say, you know, why am I so triggered by this? Or why was I triggered? And you weren't, you know, maybe a co-facilitator, you know, talk about it and say, that really got to me, it didn't get to you, what's going on here? And just, is there anything else I might have missed? So these are just some basic questions to be thinking about as you're analyzing the situation for yourself, and then to get into what I call the Passio model. And I'm going to go through all 6 stages, but here's just the first piece, which a lot of people want to rush through. And unless it's an emergency, something where there's, for example, a threat of violence, then to take your time to go through this first phase, and that's why I separate it out. Very simple. The first part of the acronym is prepare what you want to say, anticipate possible responses based on assumed positive intent on their part. So the 3 parts of that take the time to prepare how you want to approach this difficult conversation. If you're leading it, obviously it's different if somebody else is going to be doing it, but let's say you're leading the conversation or you're moving the conversation. Anticipate possible responses. So that's something, again, you can do on your own or bring in somebody else. Oh,
Sorry.
thank you. Anticipating possible responses. So to do a kind of scenario planning, well, if I say this, how might they respond? And then the other thing that, again, is part of our training is assume positive intent, that most people are not trying to create difficult conversations. They're not, or situations. They're not trying to be, I'll use a polite word, difficult. There are other terms you could use. They may just be having a bad day. They may really be confused. They may, again, some baggage has been triggered, some things that have happened in the past, and they're now responding to that. It has nothing to do with you. But try to do as much preparation as you can. However long it takes, it could be 10 minutes, could be 2 days, could be 3 weeks, however long it takes for you to be able to go through what this is about, ask yourself those other questions, and getting into more detail on the next slide. This is more the mechanics of the conversation. So the first part was that analyzing the situation. Now you're getting into the mechanics. Whom do I need to talk to? Because sometimes the presenting issue may not be from the person you really need to talk to, or maybe you need to speak to someone first, confidentiality permitting, before you speak to the other person. So who do I need to talk to? What do I need to talk about? What are my goals for the conversation? Very often we don't go into that. We don't think about, what do I want to get out of this conversation? We just think, I need to talk it out, but what do you want to get out of it? Again, try and be as specific as you can. Why do I need to talk about it now? I mean, all of us, we tend to, human nature, if we can, try and avoid it, although some of us do like to get into, tension, friction, conflict, but a lot of us don't. So why now? Again, if it's not an emergency situation, why is this the time to do it? Then the mechanics of when, where, and how will I have the talk, ideally in a private place, away from other people. Usually that's the best thing. And is there anything else? Again, always asking that question, what else have I missed? Is there anything else I need to think about? So again, I would ask you normally to think about your situation, go through these questions, plan it, and then we can go into, okay, the mechanics of the details of how the conversation is going to go. Any questions at the moment? Let me just stop, because I'm putting a lot of questions to you to think about. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides afterwards, so don't worry about taking notes. But does this make sense in terms of the process? Is this something you already do? Is something not clear? So let me just stop for a second before we go into the whole of the model. Again, feel free to come on audio or in the chat. Okay,
I think I would do some of this if I have planned the conversation ahead in the future. But if it's something that wanting to take place in, say, in the next 30 minutes or the next day or so, it becomes difficult to think about some of this, because I guess that if I'm full of emotions, it becomes difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, that unless it is an emergency, to really take the time, not to deny the emotions, but be able to, one therapist I used to work with talked about letting the wildcats out in the alleyway. So sometimes when you're angry, you're upset, you're frustrated, just to let that emotion out. And sometimes it could just be by going for a run or a walk or talking to someone or whatever it might be, to be able to allow you to let the emotionality out in an appropriate way, and then come back to the planning side. So it's allowing for both. It's not denying either side. And we obviously all work in different ways. Let me just look at the chat here. Yeah, well, obviously, Kate is saying this process could be useful for community facilitation as well. Absolutely. So it obviously has other applications. Reminding about positive intent. Andrew's saying that came up in our breakout on 2. How do you emergently facilitate difficult conversation? Exactly. So we're coming to that. And David, you have
Jeremy, sorry, Jeremy, Miguel. I was, looking through these 5 questions. I wonder if maybe we could consider also the other's point of view. What is he or she is thinking about? What are the expectations? I mean, from the other side. I mean, not only from to see these 5 points from our side.
Yeah,
but maybe having some, consideration about the other side.
Absolutely. That was implied, but I should have made that explicit. So you're right, absolutely, in terms of that part of the analyzing the situation and then planning the conversation, certainly in terms of, what do we think they want? And you'll see when we go through the model, that's also within that as well. David, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, it's thanks, Jeremy. It's just a little piece of advice I got when I was about 19, which is, 27 years ago, which means I'm 46. I saved you the calculation. And it was a piece of advice that I knew I would carry with me for years. And it was given to us by a therapist. She was teaching on a course I was doing. And this lady, she had vast experience in very different situations. And she's a very simple piece of advice she said was, don't ever tell anybody how they feel. Which I kind of went, that's going to stay with me for years. And I think it's very important, that's, I feel it's one of those situations. If you've got somebody in front of you who's angry about something, that's it. Whether they're angry about the color of the blue on the wall or the green on the carpet or something like that, they are angry. And that's it.
Right.
And, I think you get into deep water when you try to start shifting people's emotions. Yes, they shouldn't be angry about the green on the carpet. They shouldn't really be, but they are. And yeah, so I think the real mess can begin if, as a facilitator or whatever, you kind of say, well, it's not that bad. You shouldn't be angry, so.
Yeah. Don't be angry, don't be upset, you've got no and you're immediately invalidating them, or John is saying, know how you feel. So again, compassion and empathy can only go so far. And absolutely, very good reminder. Thanks very much, David, in terms of that. And yeah, and that's why part of the reason, to get back to Miguel's point, is we can try and work out what's going on with the other person, but very often we don't know, or we make wrong assumptions. So that's why part of this model is to focus on us, because particularly as facilitators, sometimes we don't pay enough attention looking to who we are, where we are in this process, what's our engagement, and what we can do. And I think it'd be appropriate, if we move to the next slide, when you can see the whole model, where again it's focused on taking it the other way around in terms of us taking responsibility, still obviously relating to the other person, but where are we in this process? So you'll see 1 we've already been through, 2 I already referred to, ask for a mutually agreeable time, private, usually private, safe place for the dialogue that's going to be safe for both people, and that's to be interpreted. Now, getting back to that thing again, what just came up about validating other people's emotions, also for yourself as well, is that it's very easy for us to get straight into, you shouldn't have said that, there's no reason to be upset, whatever it might be, or you really hurt me, or those kind of things, to get into the you. Whereas, and this process, and somebody mentioned just now around nonviolent communication, there are very many different models around having difficult conversations. And this is nothing new. What it is, it's different. It's very brief. It's easy. It doesn't require a long time to be able to learn it, and certainly a lot of money to get certified in it. It's just a basic, simple 6-stage process that anyone can use and hopefully remember first. And the idea, the number 3 and 4 are particularly important. And 3 is common to many different models. Sharing your observation, what's led up to this conversation as objectively as possible, stick to the facts, preferably witnessed by others. Now, that more objective side can't be refuted. If you've got witnesses, if you've got emails as proof or whatever it might be that led up to this. The number 4 is ones where a lot of people feel much more uncomfortable with, to state but not express your personal feelings in relation to these observations. So again, what is your personal stake in this? Why are you getting involved in this conversation? And this is the state but don't express. So the express is, I'm really angry about what you did last week or what you said just now in the group. That immediately obviously is going to turn somebody away. They're going to get defensive. They're going to not engage. But stating where, when you mentioned this earlier today, it made me feel rather uncomfortable, and I really felt that I needed to have a conversation separately with you about this. So hopefully through this medium, obviously a virtual medium, it's not as ideal as if we were face to face, that there's a difference between that stating and expressing. And again, just as you can't, or we don't want to deny other people's feelings, hopefully the other person will not try and deny your feelings, that you were upset, that you were disappointed, that whatever it might be, angry, sad. And that's where, again, it's difficult for those of us, as facilitators, because we're not used to expressing that in the same way. And that's the difference again between facilitating a conversation with others versus leading it ourselves. And that's when, we're having to take a risk basically in terms of that. And what I found is, and obviously this is something I've been working with myself for many years in terms of having difficult conversations, when you are able to express that in a way that the other person can hear. And then number 5 is where then inviting the other person to share where they're coming from, what their ideas are, and then having an open discussion instead of rushing to that. That's where you can hopefully engender that constructive engagement. No guarantee, but that's the idea behind it. And I find that it does work, and it doesn't have to take that long. Your observations, number 3 could be 1 or 2 sentences. Number 4 could be 1 or 2 sentences as well. But if you do that before coming into number 5, that can create an environment, a framework, if you like, to be able to have that constructive conversation and kind of sharing where people are coming from. And then number 6 is the follow-up, common approach, etc. But just wondering, again, as people are looking at this, clearly, comparing with other models that you're familiar with, is this something that makes sense? Any questions about this?
This, Jeremy, covers what we said before. This is about being in the other person's shoes. It's basically, I like very much here there are some words I like. Mutually is something I like. Inviting others is the act of inviting is something wonderful. I think is really good. And at the end, the point 6 is really good as well. The common approach, outlining a common approach, is closing this process in this way.
And this conversation could be 5 minutes, it could be hours and hours. And I've had both, I'm sure many of you have as well. And the question Shalaka is asking, how do we address the situation where the other person are not prepared to have the difficult conversation? That's the thing, that's why I use the word invite, because, well, ask number 2 and then invite number 5, because they may not be ready. And that's where asking for a mutually agreeable time. And then very often, it's human nature, they may say, well, why do you want to talk? Am I in trouble? Particularly if there's a power differential. And then to maybe say, well, it's around something that came up this morning. And just wondering, I wanted to clarify something, so obviously you have to decide on the situation about whether how much detail to give ahead of time, and so that people will, have enough to be able to be willing to have the conversation, but again, not take anything out of context. So it is a delicate balance, but the idea of number 2 and 5 is inviting people in, but number 3 and 4 is around sharing where you're coming from. Which again, for a facilitator where they may have seen you as a neutral party, suddenly to step into a more proactive role, that can be clearly disorienting and goes away against some of our preparation training, in terms of what to do within a situation. So that's where, again, when something is triggered around difference and having to get into a different way of connecting and engaging and talking to somebody. So
hi David, could I just ask, so
please.
this model here, we do it in sequence, is it? It's like from 1 2 3 4 5 6, is that how it works?
No, I mean, this is kind of ideal, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. So it's just a guideline, and you don't have to say, okay, I've done number 3 now, I have to go on to number 4. Sometimes it comes out in different ways, but ideally, to be able to have number 3 and 4 in some way before you get into 5 and 6. I think, to me, that's the biggest mistake, is to rush into 5 and 6, which a lot of us tend to do.
Thank you.
Conscious of time, what we hope to do was to go into breakouts to actually do some role plays around this. And let me ask you, do you want to continue in plenary to kind of talk this through? And there's a lot of comments in chat I've not been able to get to yet. Or would you like to break out in small groups to talk about specific situations? I'll leave it to you in terms of that. Where is the energy in the group right now? David's saying plenary.
Yeah, 3 for plenary.
Mm-hmm. Plenary, okay. Yeah. I mean, that was my sense.
So shall we stop sharing then and have the conversation?
As long as people can see the model. So
okay.
let me just put it into the chat. And if anyone wants to discuss this more, or even go through a specific situation, let me just say now I'm happy to arrange a separate conversation around this. But it seems like there's a lot of points coming up, and I don't want to pay short shrift to those. So let me just put the Passio and putting it into the chat, so you can refer to it there or you can take a screenshot or a photo on your phone if you want to. And again, we'll share with this afterwards. And Paul saying you'd like to see a breakout scenario. We'll share that with you afterwards. I mean, basically, we were asking you to come up with your own scenarios, but we had just a process around that for role playing. So let me go back to, you should be able to see that in the six steps in the chat. And let me go back to some of the points that were made. Okay. So I'm going back to Kate's. Reminds me of the nonviolent communication approach has helped me get through some tricky situations. And certainly this seems like I've not been trained in NVC, but Kate, if you'd like to come on audio just to share a little bit about that, obviously I understand it's a much more involved process in terms of understanding and being certified in it. So is there anything you want to share on audio relating to that, Kate? Wait for you to come in, or if you, oh, there's a lot of things in chat. Oh, okay. Kate saying my connection's a little weak, but if you want to share by email later, we can talk about it. Let me just find where we are. There's a lot of in the chat right now. Paul is saying, Sharka, I find that if they aren't ready to chat now, try to set another time. If never, then boundaries to protect yourself and the group may be necessary, such participation, privileges, and household relationship with you, and sometimes removal. You know, when I've had people that are not willing to have the conversation, are disruptive or abusive in a session, will not talk or are not willing to engage properly, sometimes just has them, okay, well, in that case, if you've got, obviously it helps if you have agreements, guidelines, etc., and then just ask them, please, if you're not prepared to engage, then would you mind stepping out of the group for now, and we can talk about the future separately. So again, trying to protect the integrity of the group if that's the case, particularly if they've been abusive in some way. Non-compliant is one thing, but abusive, insulting, using inappropriate words, whatever, then clearly that's something we need to deal with. Managing bullying tactics, that can be part of it as well. That can come out in different ways. Sometimes that can be an awareness issue where somebody doesn't realize they're bullying. It could be something as simple as always wanting the first word or talking too much or whatever. That can come across as being bullying in terms of you're going to listen to my views. So again, we have to make that judgment call again of is it conscious, is it unconscious, deliberate, how disruptive is it? So we always have those judgment calls. John is sharing importance of co-facilitation. Absolutely, it can be very important. And again, I've been in situations, as I'm sure many of you have, where if you do have co-facilitation, that one of you can continue with the conversation in the group, and then another can hopefully go outside and address the situation one-on-one if there's someone who's being disruptive or abusive. That certain, and then to be able to discuss what to do during a break or debrief afterwards, certainly. Sudeep, that's another whole issue there. Again, if you want to talk about this a bit more around minority, majority, that's where the agreements obviously can come in, with the power of the group to be able to come together and talk about, if it contravenes some of the agreements that you've had, etc. So dealing with that, that can also sometimes backfire, unfortunately, and I've had that in the past where some people, won't stand up because of perceived power differentials or whatever. So that sometimes they may still be looking to you to be able to lead that, or you to be able to deal with what is perceived as bullying behavior. Again, I'm just looking for, Andrea had to leave. Anastasia is saying we could do a role play in plenary for everyone to observe, take notes, and reflect. I want to observe time, and Pat wanted to say something at the end. So Anastasia, unfortunately, I think we've run out of time to do that, but there's nothing to stop us in a future session to be able to do that if people want to do that, or do that as a separate session. So I don't think we're going to have time for that today, unfortunately. Larry's also found MVC, nonviolent communication. Anastasia is asking, from experience, have you noticed some particular facilitation methods that led to an agreement out of many? I think some of them have already been mentioned. Pat sharing the slides now, and we can add to these as well.
No, these are not your slides, Jeremy. These are
Oh,
the slides
these are,
for the IAF next
oh,
session.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll share the slides for this session separately.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're running out of time. That was my fear, and clearly there's a lot of things to come out of this. So what I'd like to do, if you can just put up the slides again, Pat, so I can end my more official part of this and then hand back to you for now. And again, If we could go to slide 20 with the actions on it. Just a final question. We've had many questions today. What will you do differently in relation to planning and leading difficult conversations in future? If you'd like to share that in the chats. And then we've got some resources here. And in fact, I'm going to add to this before we send you these slides, because there are a few mentioned here. Some are familiar, maybe some are new. Got a couple of slides here of information. And actually, I realized that I don't know how I didn't include the nonviolent communication. So I need to put that back in there. And then just from me for a moment, is closing thoughts from Dan Musher Hamilton relating to this is, rather than relying on a thin, idealized hope that we all one day just get along, we can approach conflict resolution as an art form that we're privileged to develop and hone. And certainly, I think for all of us, it's something nobody has the answer, nobody does it right every time, but however we approach conflict, difficult conversations, it is an art rather than a science, which gets back to the question earlier around, do we address the 6 stages of the Passio linear? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It really is, this is where experience comes in, our intuition, time, all of those elements, and to really, how do we develop and hone our skills in being able to face difficult conversations, prepare for them adequately or as best we can, and then be able to lead them and learn from them as well. So that's a piece of it. So I'll leave you with that for now, and I'll hand back to Pat to be able to close things out for now. And again, if you want to, we can come back to this again.
I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you everyone. And we've come to the end of our evening. And this is just to share with you what else is in store from the IAF Social Inclusion Group. We are 40 facilitators all working in the field of social inclusion, and we meet monthly. And these are the programs that are on for the coming months. So I've put this file into the chat so you can download it as a reminder if you want to join us the next time. Yes, we thank Jeremy for his wonderful sharing, and he's managed to cover such a lot of ground in the 90 minutes. So do take the lessons away and find a partner to practice with, because like all good things, they get better when you practice. Yeah. So thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you all for your participation. And these are some of the contact points if you want to contact us. And Jeremy, I put your LinkedIn address. I hope I have your okay for that.
It's actually J Solomons. There's no C there, so
okay.
you can just do a search. There's only 2 Jeremy Solomons, and one of them is in Boston. So I'm the only one in Kigali.
Okay. And that's about it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and anyone or everyone who has anything to say at the close of this evening, morning or afternoon for you, feel free.
Hi, Pat, Colin here. Could I ask the slides and everything? How do we get it, or do we get it from you? Or
we will be sending it late to your email address. If you've given your email address in the registration, we will be sending that to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep, I'll send it to you. So any other questions? Got some more from the chat. Like what is it, Anastasia? Thanks for sharing that biggest takeaway. Be ready for rejection and approach it strategically. No utopist ideas, very much so. Yeah. And John just sharing again about the IAF and about the SIG. So again, we'll capture the chat and share that with you too. Let's see if there's anything else.
Yeah, I see John asking people,
Oh.
if you are not an IAF member, do go to the IAF website, which is iaf-world.org, and consider membership, because it brings you in contact with facilitators all over the globe. So it's an amazing link and connection. Yes.
Right. We've had
Make
that
it a little
today.
bit easier for Jeremy because he's reading chat and responding. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Come back with your stories. We would love to hear on how you've managed and how you've done projects in Rwanda and more. That would be a
Okay.
fantastic experience.
We are taking a picture, although there's only 17 now. We were 23 at the top, but we've taken a picture now. If you want